Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the most comprehensive Hindu analysis on YouTube. So let's start the discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 8 important articles, 6 topics that are relevant for both prelims and mains, and 2 topics that are important for the prelims exam. So let's cover these topics comprehensively so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. Now, before we start, I have a very important announcement. Recently, Unacademy has marked its 10th anniversary. And as part of our commitment to help our students, Unacademy is providing a never before offer so that you can enroll for our classes. So, this limited period offer will give you a discount of 50% on our IAS courses. And along with that, you can avail a double validity, which means, let's say you take a 6 month subscription, you get a 6 month addition at no additional cost. You buy a 9 month subscription, you get a 9 month top up absolutely free. Same for 12 months and 18 months. So you can extend your subscription, which is absolutely free. And you also get Unacademy Assure, which essentially provides you a free extension in case you don't clear the examination. For some reason, let's say you're not able to clear the exam, we will provide a free subscription, which is an extension on your course to ensure that we are there with you to guide you till you clear this examination. So this is a limited period offer. Those interested to enroll, please click on the link provided in the video description and enter the code IAS English. And as part of our birthday celebrations, it calls for rewards as well. So there is a spin the wheel contest which is going on, and the link for the same is provided in the video description as well. So you stand to win attractive rewards by participating in this. So those interested can take a look. And if you want the PDF of the analysis, please join our official Telegram channel by scanning the QR code. After the session ends, we will be sharing the PDF over here. So let's get started and look at the first topic. On page number 8 and page number 5, there are 2 articles related to Karnataka. In the Karnataka Legislative Assembly, 2 bills are being considered, which are being pushed by the state government. And let's discuss these bills one by one, as it has major implications. It raises key constitutional questions. It has implications for the society. So let's look at them one by one. And first, we'll start with the bill against hate speech and hate crime, which is being pushed by Chief Minister Siddaramaya. The Siddaramaya government is promoting the introduction of a bill that prohibits hate speech and hate crime and provides for strict punishment in order to maintain social harmony and to prevent these dastardly acts from being committed. Now, this editorial provides a very insightful overview of why this bill is problematic. Though the intention might be to curb hate speech and hate crime, it can be easily misused to stifle constitutional rights and fundamental rights. This law could easily get abused by those in power, giving them that totalitarian control over right to free speech and expression. And that is a concern which is being flagged by the editorial. The editorial is pointing out that the bill contains few problematic provisions. And in the name of targeting hate speech and hate crime, it could end up crippling your right to free speech and expression. So let's dive a little deep into this topic and understand this in slight detail. Now, what do you mean by hate speech? Hate speech refers to targeted speech against a particular community, targeting people of a particular religion or people of a certain caste or because of the color of their skin or because of their gender or because of their sexual orientation, or could be because of the language that they speak, or it could be because of their ethnicity or race. So, on these lines, if an individual or a community is targeted with hate filled speech, which could probably incite violence as well, then such speech is labeled as hate speech. I think there is some glitch going on in the video. I would ask the studio manager to check Shiva, there is some issue going on with the. Hello? Audio is fine? Video issue is sorted? Just check the stream. Apologies for the inconvenience. There was a slight technical glitch. So let me repeat the point I was making. We were discussing what is a hate speech, how it could lead to hate crime. Hate speech is any targeted, inflammatory articles or speech which is aimed at a certain community or a group of people belonging to a certain religion or a certain caste or because of their gender or because of their ethnicity or because of the language they speak. So, on these lines, if an individual or a group of people, if they're targeted with inflammatory articles, inflammatory writings, inflammatory speech, which could result in crime, which could result in targeted violence against them, such speech is labeled as hate speech. So the targeted crime that happens against such communities is labeled as hate crime. Now, usually, hate speech and hate crime is a result of the prejudice which might be prevalent in the society, especially amongst the majority community, which might look to target the minority groups. Or it could be the other way around as well. But in general, hate speech, hate crime is often targeted against the minorities. So this is a result of the prejudice, the bias which is present in the society, and it is further influenced by misinformation. It is also influenced heavily by fake news that circulates, especially on social media. So wrong information, which is aimed at targeting a certain community, could influence the views and opinions of the larger section of the society. And this could be misused by the radical elements, the extremist forces, and even by political forces, mainly to polarize the society on religious lines, on linguistic lines, on ethnic lines, and in order to concentrate political power, in order to ensure that they appeal to their vote bank and ensure that they can influence the elections on the lines of the social divisions that are prevalent. So, such acts are labeled as hate speech and hate crime. Yes, of course, it is essential to tackle hate speech and hate crime, and we already have sufficient laws in this regard. The Indian Penal Code, which is now the BNS, it does contain provisions that deal with hate speech, but the provision focuses on imminent threat, which could result in imminent violence. If someone's writing or speech could result in imminent violence against a community, that is when the provisions will be invoked and the authorities will have to step in to protect the minorities and the groups which are being targeted with hate speech and hate crime. So now the government of Karnataka is considering this bill to prohibit hate speech and hate crime and bring stringent punishment with it. Now let's understand where the problem lies. Let's understand what are the provisions being considered in this bill by the government of Karnataka and how this could be against the spirit of the constitution. See, in the proposed bill, it recognizes types of hate speech and hate crime, and it provides for strict punishment. The punishment will include imprisonment along with hefty penalties, and essentially the law enforcement, that is the police, the state police, they would have a lot of discretion to interpret the provisions of this law. The law contains terms such as promoting enmity between communities or disrupting social harmony or making speeches with a ill will to drive a social divide and promote hatred and violence against a community. So such terms are used to define hate speech and hate crime. Now, this is where the problem lies with the bill. The editorial correctly points out that these provisions, they are very subjective when it comes to its interpretation. The interpretation will rest with the law enforcement, with the police. So when you're giving such leeway to the police, to interpret the term enmity or ill will or social harmony. This subjectivity could be easily misused by the ones who are in power. They could label any act of criticism or even genuine speech and writings as hate speech, and they could possibly link that with disruption of social harmony and promotion of enmity, and book those people and bring these charges against them, get them arrested. This will have a chilling effect on the fundamental right of free speech and expression. It could have a crippling effect on the right to free speech and expression, which is guaranteed under Article 19. It is the subjectivity in these terms, which is part of the bill, that raises concern. Now, imagine a scenario. Let's say there is a chief minister who's from the Dalit community or a chief minister who's from the lower caste. Let's say the person is corrupt and there is criticism from the opposition, from the media, from the activists calling for the resignation of this chief minister. And a lot of articles are being published, speeches are being delivered to try and expose the corrupt acts of this chief minister, not because of his caste, but because of his corrupt behavior. Now, this chief minister can protect himself by misusing this law. They can bring charges of hate speech and hate crime by labeling the criticism as targeted speech against his community. He can project this that he's being targeted because he's from the lower caste, because he's a Dalit. And that is where those in power could potentially misuse the provisions of the law. So there are many instances where such provisions can go wrong. When such discretion is given to the law enforcement, usually the ones in power tend to misuse and abuse the authority. It could be any party in power. Even down the line, the law has great potential to be misused. And that is where it runs against the spirit of the Constitution itself. And it could threaten the fundamental right to free speech and expression. That's why the editorial says, even though the intention might be right, the intention might be to tackle hate speech and hate crime, but the actual impact could it could be seen with regard to how it might be misused and how it might be used to target free speech and expression. That is why the editorial is urging the Karnataka government to take back the bill, to withdraw the bill, and use the existing provisions in the law to deal with hate speech and hate crime. It's not that we don't have sufficient provisions. There are enough provisions. What is needed is the strict enforcement of the existing legal framework to deal with hate speech and hate crime. So let me know what is your view, what is your take on this topic, and please take up this mains practice question. Karnataka's hate crimes bill is a threat to free speech, critically examine. So first, maybe you can start out by giving the context that Karnataka government is pushing such a bill in the assembly, or you can start out by defining hate speech and hate crime, how it is a social threat, how it can disrupt social order and harmony, and why you need a stringent action against hate speech and hate crime. Then explain the existing provisions in the law that IPC, Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, has the sufficient provisions to deal with hate speech and hate crime. Now, then present the objectives of the bill being pushed by the Karnataka government and how it can go against the fundamental right to free speech and expression. Point out the subjective terms that are used: enmity, social harmony, right, and promotion of ill will. These are open to interpretation, and if you basically give the the authority to interpret to the police, to the law enforcement, those who are in power, who have that control over the police, will tend to misuse that, right? There will be cases where it will be potentially misused and it will be used to target criticism, opposition, dissent, and curb free speech and expression. And that is where such laws can become more dangerous. They will do more harm than doing the good that they are promising. So bring out that argument here and illustrate that with an example. Now, coming to the next topic, there's a related article. I told you Karnataka is pushing another bill, which is to deal with social boycott. The Karnataka government is pushing another bill in the assembly to deal with social boycott, which has a huge impact on the society. Social boycott refers to the boycott of a group of people or individuals, mainly because of their caste, because of their background. Let's say, for example, in a village, You have an interfaith couple who come from different castes who had a love marriage. Now, this entire village, which might be orthodox, they might be against the love marriage of this interfaith or intercaste couple. So, the so called village panchayat leaders or the assemblies, which you see often in the rural areas, the caste panchayats, which might be there, they might issue a boycott order asking the entire village to boycott this couple, to not talk to them, to not interact with them, to not allow them into public spaces like temples and community places, and ostracize them from the village itself, from the community itself. So, such local involvement of the community and ostracizing an individual or a group of people because of what they have done, right? Taking such drastic action to essentially segregate people on the lines of caste and, let's say, their social status, their background, etc. Such social boycott is a threat to social integrity. It's a threat to social harmony. This is what could lead to the sustenance of the practice of untouchability. It could lead to the othering of the minority classes and the communities in the society. So, this bill being pushed by the Karnataka government, it defines what constitutes a social boycott. For example, denying someone employment opportunity because they are from a particular community, or isolating an individual or group of people from the village itself because of their caste, because of their background. So, these social boycotts are clearly defined under the proposed bill. 20 types of such social exclusion is defined. Refusal to deal with members of a community, denying them opportunities, denying them access, or, as I said, isolating them, treating them as others. So, such boycotts are prohibited under this law with a punishment of up to 3 years in jail, along with a hefty fine. And the caste panchayats and the uh, unofficial, informal panchayats that exist at the local level, they are completely banned under this law. These caste panchayats, the local panchayats that exist at the village level, right? They are completely banned. And thus, it seeks to protect the weaker sections, the vulnerable, and the minorities, and those who might face such boycotts and ostracization by the society. So, this is another bill being pushed in the interest of social reforms and social welfare. Now, moving on, there's another interesting article on page number 8, a column related to judicial appointments in the High Court. Now, when you look at the High Court, appointments to the High Court is covered under Article 217 of the Constitution of India, the appointment of judges to the High Court. It is covered under the provisions of Article 217. What does Article 217 state? According to Articles 217, it is the President of India who will be appointing judges to the High Court based on consultation held with the Chief Justice of India and the Governor of the concerned state. This further is outlined under the Memorandum of Procedure of 1998, which provides for the collegium system that was brought out by the Supreme Court's jurisprudence on judicial appointments through the second and third judges case, the second and third judges case of 1990s. Through these two cases, the Supreme Court laid the foundation of the collegium system, which is now formalized under the Memorandum of Procedure of 1998, that defines the process of appointment of judges to the higher judiciary. Now, talking about appointments to the High Court, if let's say the Chief Justice of the High Court has to be appointed, then the Supreme Court Collegium, headed by the Chief Justice of India, comprising of senior most judges of the Supreme Court, would have a consultation with the concerned state, the governor, the Union Law Ministry, and once the recommendations are forwarded, concerns can be raised, questions can be asked by the government on the merit, on the suitability. But if the same recommendation is sent back by the collegium, then that person has to be appointed by the president as the chief justice of that particular high court. Other than the chief justice, if other judges of the high court have to be appointed, then of course the chief justice of the high court would play a critical role, initiate the proposal. And before the vacancy opens up, 6 months before the vacancy gets created, the Chief Justice initiates the proposal for the appointment of High Court judges and sends the proposal to the state government so that the state government, headed by the Chief Minister, can take a look at the recommended names, and the office of the governor would also be involved. The state government can ask for clarifications. It can even raise an objection on the grounds of merit, seniority, suitability, etc. And if the collegium of the High Court, headed by the Chief Justice of that High Court, along with two senior most judges, if they reiterate the same names, then the state government, through the governor, has to recommend to the law ministry, the union law ministry, which in turn will recommend to the president to appoint those judges to the High Court. Right? So this is the established process. Now, there is a particular incident which has happened in Tamil Nadu with regard to the Madras High Court and the recent appointment of few judges to the Madras High Court. So here the focus is on the procedure that was followed, which is not exactly as per the memorandum of procedure that is laid down in 1998, based on the second and third judges' cases in which Supreme Court brought out the jurisprudence providing for the collegium system of appointment of judges. See, the collegium system itself is highly criticized for its opaqueness, for its lack of transparency. There have been allegations about the very integrity of the judiciary, that out of turn appointments have taken place. Merit, seniority, suitability sometimes has allegedly been ignored. And that's where the criticism comes up against the collegium system. But that apart, there's another issue which has come up here in the context of the Madras High Court, and I want to explain this particular issue which has come up. See, in November last month, the collegium, headed by the Chief Justice of the Madras High Court, recommended the appointment of 6 district judges to be elevated as High Court judges. These names were forwarded to the state government, the office of the governor, and the state government of Tamil Nadu requested for a clarification. They did not object on the grounds of merit or seniority or suitability. The state government of Tamil Nadu wanted a clarification as to why the fundamental procedure which is laid down was not followed. Why there was a departure from the established procedure in the recommendation of the names of these High Court judges for appointment. Now, instead of addressing the queries raised by the state government, the High Court actually went ahead and appointed 9 more advocates to fill additional vacancies which were present in the Madras High Court. But this is not where the problem lies. The problem lies with a particular judge, Justice Nisha Banu. Justice Nisha Banu happened to be the third senior most judge in the Madras High Court, part of the collegium of the Madras High Court. In terms of seniority, the third senior most and part of the collegium. So Justice Nisha Banu should have clearly been elevated. She was part of the Madurai bench earlier, and she should have been elevated to the High Court bench of the Madras High Court. This is what was expected. But right before these appointments could be proposed by the collegium, there was something else that happened in October, 1 month before the recommendations were provided by the collegium. There was a role played by the Supreme Court collegium where it advised the Union Law Ministry to transfer Justice Nisha Banu to the Kerala High Court. Now, as per seniority, if Justice Nisha Banu had remained with the Madurai bench of the Madras High Court, given her seniority, given her vast experience of 9 years as part of the higher judiciary, she was in line for elevation to the High Court bench of the Madras High Court. So, in the November orders that were proposed by the collegium, Justice Nisha Banu's name should have been included, ideally. But right before that, a month before that, the Supreme Court collegium recommends to the Union Law Ministry to transfer Justice Nisha Banu to Kerala High Court and there is no explanation provided, no clarity as to why this transfer was carried out. The collegium at the High Court level also does not clarify as to why Justice Nisha Banu has been completely sidelined, excluded, despite her seniority and despite her merit. So, in her place, another judge, Justice Ramesh, has been elevated to the High Court bench. And again, the grounds, the due process, it has not been dealt with by the collegium. The collegium remains silent. So, when the state government asked for a clarification, instead of clarifying why Justice Nisha Banu was sidelined and another junior judge was brought in place, instead of giving that clarification, the High Court collegium has gone ahead and appointed 9 advocates as judges to the High Court to fill the additional vacancies that were there. So, this brings up the lack of transparency in judicial appointments. How easily constitutional norms and laid down procedures can be violated without valid reasons, without valid explanations. Because the state government is a constitutional entity as well. And it does play a role in the appointment process, as we saw in Article 217. The state government's consultation is part of the process. Yes, the collegium system helps in protecting the independence from the executive's interference. But such changes without explanation, without valid reasons, raises questions whether some of the appointments are motivated, ideologically motivated, politically motivated, as to why these last minute changes happen. Because if Justice Nisha Banu was not ordered to move to the Kerala High Court, by the way, just to let you know what is the status, Justice Nisha Banu has not accepted the transfer order and she continues to remain, when the article has been published, she continues to remain with the Madras High Court. But the fact is, she is part of the Madurai bench, not the High Court bench. She has been sidelined for the High Court bench. So, if not for this October order transferring the judge to Kerala High Court, she would be in line for an elevation and she would have been part of the High Court collegium. Yes, now she is essentially in defiance of the collegium's order, of the law ministry's order. But this again brings up this controversy of alleged political interference in judicial appointments and lack of transparency within the collegium system, the lack of reasons provided, the lack of explanation that is given out. This is seen as a threat to the very independence of the judiciary, and it could affect the credibility of the institution itself. It erases the divisions, the separation between the executive and judiciary to some extent. Right? It has brought up allegations whether central government was involved in influencing the orders of the Supreme Court Collegium to push for the transfer of Justice Nisha Banu to Kerala High Court to prevent her from getting elevated to the High Court bench. These allegations have come up, and so the state government is asking for these answers. It is asking for an explanation, but there is no response coming from the collegium and from the central government. That is where the writer, who is a former judge of the Madras High Court, believes that the High Court must break its silence. The collegium, headed by the Chief Justice of the Madras High Court, they must break the silence and give that and they must give that clarification to the state government, which has sought the reasons why Justice Nisha Banu was sidelined despite her seniority and why another judge was appointed in the place. It's about following the laid down procedure, which the Supreme Court itself has brought out through its jurisprudence. If you're violating the established judicial precedent, then what's the point of having a memorandum of procedure that was based on the rulings of the second and third judge's case? So that is the question being raised by the writer, the author, who himself has been a former judge of the Madras High Court, and he expresses concern about the appointment process, the lack of transparency in it, and how these questions come up, which could affect the very image of the judiciary, which could affect the integrity of the judiciary. So please take up this practice question on judicial appointments to higher judiciary. So, using this particular case as one of the examples, you can make a strong case as to why the collegium system has its flaws. Though the judiciary believes it is needed to protect itself from executive's interference and to maintain the separation of powers, this system could be blatantly misused as well. And this could even lead to collusion between political forces and the judiciary, raising questions about the integrity of the judiciary itself. So bring out the shortcomings of the collegium system and try to argue why a more transparent process is necessary. Maybe you can draw parallels with the appointment process followed in other democratic countries, like in US, in UK, and provide that comparative analysis to show how judicial appointments can be made more transparent in India as well. Now, moving on, we have an editorial on page number 8 that analyzes the national security strategy that was recently brought out by the United States. The Trump administration has published a new doctrine for its foreign policy and national security policy. And this will have serious implications for the global world order. President Trump is looking to completely reset American foreign policy. So let's break down the new national security strategy of the United States. What implications does it have for the world? What implications does it have for India? That is something we'll quickly understand. See, under the national security strategy that was published by the White House in coordination with the National Security Council, there are 5 foreign policy priorities which have been outlined. This is said to be a complete departure from traditional foreign policy interests of the United States. Now, I'm sure all of you are aware that foreign policy of any nation is designed to serve the self interest of that country. And there's nothing wrong with that. Every country would like to serve their own interests. In the context of United States, I'm sure you're aware that US was always trying to exert its influence around the world by interfering in every region, in every part of the world, by trying to play a direct role in every conflict, trying to engineer regime changes, getting covertly involved in the internal affairs and politics of almost every region and every nation in order to exert that American pull. But now Trump is trying to reset this approach with a new set of priorities being outlined for American foreign policy and national security. So, first, let's look at the 5 top priorities that are mentioned in this particular document that has been issued by the US. The first priority, interestingly, is on ending mass migration. That is the first foreign policy priority, to ensure there is no illegal migration into the US and put a stop to mass migration and strictly regulate and control even the legal migration routes into the United States. See, such a policy document, it's like a guide to the American diplomats. It's a reference book of sorts to American bureaucrats, to American diplomats who will be implementing these policies on the ground. So, what will be the message that goes out to American immigration officers and American diplomats and law enforcement agencies when the first priority is to put an end to mass migration? Yes, US has every right to deal with illegal migration, to curb illegal migration into the country. But any unnecessary aggression and bias against migrants who might have entered the country legally or contributing to the American society, to the American economy, could end up disrupting lakhs of families. It could end up having a complete negative effect on the people to people relations that US maintains with other countries because of the large diaspora population that is present. For example, India US relations is in large part defined by the strong Indian diaspora community. So, strict migration policies, which could affect legal migrants, visa holders, green card holders, will have serious implications for the Indian community in the US. That is something which causes concern for everyone. Look at how Indian students have been affected who are looking for opportunities in the US, or how Indian professionals, Indian workers seeking opportunities in US have been affected. They are struggling to get an American visa. Look at how Indians have been deported. Some of them who had legal visas and fulfilled all the requirements, some of them have been deported. Yes, they can deal with illegal migration just like any other country would. They have every right to stop illegal migration, deport illegal migrants. But if the policy extends to affecting legal routes of migration, that is where the problem begins. So, this marks the entry of our world into uncharted territory. We are moving away from globalization. We are looking at a more conservative world order, from a globalized, liberal, democratic world order. You are clearly witnessing a shift towards more conservatism. on nationalistic lines, on the lines of nativist versus non-nativist argument, that who's a local, who's a non-local. That is something you find across the world. It has become the central theme in the politics of almost every country, from Germany to Italy to India to United States. This has become the central debate. Now you're finding this being reflected in America's national security strategy as well. Ending mass migration is the number one priority. So clearly, it means there will be bigger changes to be expected in the immigration policies of the US. And this, of course, will have an impact on the Indian community in the United States. Next, protecting core rights and liberties, including freedom of speech, freedom of religion. Now, you might say this is a much needed priority. US being one of the largest and most stable and one of the oldest democracies would be expected to uphold basic fundamental rights like freedom of speech and freedom of religion. But the problem is the agenda of the Trump administration, the allegations against the Trump regime, that they are pushing a certain narrative, an ideological narrative, where white Christians are considered to be more supreme, more superior compared to other faiths and other races. And the promotion of far right wing radical speech. And that is something you see on American social media, on the streets as well in the US, where far right wing extremist outlets and organizations are gaining more ground and voice. And that causes alarm. And it's being defended with the Trump administration in the name of freedom of speech and freedom of religion. So this is where the line is crossed. And it does have implications for the rest of the world. It means that US is pushing a certain ideological narrative which could contradict the foreign policy interests of, let's say, countries like India. Any rise in far right wing extremism in the US, right? Or any rise in conservative ideas in the US, the, let's say, the xenophobic sentiments which might be promoted through free speech by encouraging more far right wing outlets to spew hatred against immigrant families or people of color. This could have serious implications, real on the ground implications for the Indian community. That is something that would worry India. The next priority is that US will stop propping up other countries and regions, meaning US will not, it will not be there to provide financial, military, or any other form of support to other countries and regions to prop them up. See, previously, US was involved in almost every region of the world, from South Asia to Central Asia to Europe to Africa, you name it. US was present, propping up governments, supplying arms and weapons to exert American influence, or how US was known to be the largest sponsorer of the NATO to guarantee European security, to ensure security across the Atlantic. The US was the one mainly contributing for regional security efforts in Europe, or how US would deploy troops in other countries in Asia, in Africa to fight terrorism. The presence of American troops in, let's say, in Yemen or in African nations or in Syria, how US has played that role in countering terrorism. This role of the US will come to an end. US doesn't want to be involved in regional issues. Now, this is both good and bad. Depends on which conflict or which country or which region you're talking about. For example, let's say you're talking about Europe, you're talking about NATO. See, European countries, they became complicit. The West European nations, UK, France, Germany, Italy, and the others, they became dependent on American military presence, American funds, and the NATO to provide that collective security to Europe against any possible Russian threats and Russian aggression. So today, Trump is saying that you guys are not defending yourself. You have not spent enough on military. Why should US contribute to your defense? Which is a valid argument. But the risk here is if the US were to retreat, it would embolden the aggression that we have seen from someone like Russian President Putin. See, India might support Russia because of strategic reasons and the historical relations that we have with the country. But if you take that out and observe the Ukraine conflict neutrally, Russian aggression cannot be tolerated. The Russian aggression is primarily built on one man's agenda, that is Putin's agenda. And the kind of destabilization and human right violations it has caused is something that should alarm everyone, including India. And US was expected to act as that counterweight, to play a role in Europe, to push back Russia to some extent, not to fulfill American interests, but to maintain stability in the global order. See, you might argue that the reason why Russia and Putin got aggressive is because of American interference. Yes, that's completely valid argument. But however, the presence of US in Europe and the US backing to European powers was bringing that balance in the European region, maintaining stability in that region. Now, Trump is basically blaming the European countries entirely for all the problems that are plaguing Europe. That's why the new national security strategy has been rejected by the European countries. Germany has come out publicly and vocally criticized the new Trump policy, where European countries are being blamed for their economic stagnation, for their retreat in the geopolitical landscape. And essentially, the US is saying that we will not prop you guys up anymore. You look after yourself, you look after your regions, but US will exert its influence in trade. It'll exert its influence in its um, military domain where necessary to protect America's interests, security interests. But it will stop propping up and protecting other countries and regions. That explains the retreat of American troops from, let's say, Afghanistan and other areas where US had a direct military role. So this, in a way, can be good as it reduces American interference. But the problem is a sudden retreat of the US could create a vacuum which could be occupied by aggressive forces, extremist forces that could create new challenges in regions across the world. Now, let's say America is not closely involved in fighting terrorism in Pakistan, Afghanistan region. India would be affected by it. The American counterterrorism role in AFPAC region was critical for India. India would collaborate with US to counter terror groups like Al Qaeda, Lashkar-e-Toiba, and the others. Now, without that American pressure on, let's say, Pakistan and its proxies, there will be a greater risk for countries like India. So that is where this policy could be problematic. It could completely reset the global order itself. Then the other priority identified is to solidify American influence. How? US wants to strike deals, play a role in resolving conflicts. That again explains why Trump is so interested to be a mediator, to achieve ceasefire agreements, sign peace accords. He claims to have negotiated so many peace agreements. This is how US envisions itself as a global leader. The document states, I was going through the initial charter of the document. It says that the objective of the new national security strategy is to make America the strongest and the most influential global power, not by spending American money or by risking the lives of American soldiers, but by using American economy as a leverage to force other countries, to threaten them, to influence them, to end conflicts and maintain that influence. It also shows that maybe Trump administration is willing to carve out spheres of influence, which means to strike deals with its rivals like Russia, China, and instead of engaging in a direct rivalry with them, US will work out a deal to decide the spheres of influence where they will not meddle with each other. This is again a reminder of colonial imperial era policies where the European colonial powers would carve out the world for themselves, like how Portugal, Britain, Spain, and others, they divided the world between themselves and established their spheres of influence. The national security strategy of US talks about that. It identifies China as the most significant threat for US, but it proposes sort of an arrangement with China to carve out a sphere of influence, meaning China would be allowed to do what it wants in the Indo-Pacific, and China would not interfere with, let's say, the Americas region, with the Western Hemisphere. Similarly, US is probably willing to allow Russia to dictate terms in Europe. And in turn, it expects Russia not to meddle in other areas of influence where US wants to maintain its primacy. So this could lead to a world where there are three major powers, US, Russia, China, which will divide the world, carve out the world for themselves, and exert their respective spheres of influence. and they will not allow anyone else to interfere. This could undermine India's policy of multi alignment. This could expose India to Chinese threats and Chinese aggression, and it could contain Russia as well. And it would limit Russia's ability to help India, especially against Chinese threats. So this is where the challenge lies for us. See, until now, US kept on promising India that it would support us in the Indo-Pacific to deal with Chinese aggression and maintain a rules-based order. But if such an arrangement is created between US and China and US and Russia, where they carve out spheres of influence, this could undermine the interests of countries like India. And the national security strategy also states that the most important focus of America's foreign policy will be on the reindustrialization of the American economy. It would be on reducing the trade deficits, using tariffs as a leverage to influence other countries. We have already seen and borne the brunt of Trump's tariffs, right? And that is exactly what they are talking about. They are now cementing this into their diplomacy, into their security strategy. That US will just use its economic strength to punish others, to negotiate with others. This will always be to the disadvantage of countries like India, which are weaker economically compared to the United States and its economy. So they can force concessions out of India. Take the India US trade deal, which is going on. US is clearly using the tariffs as a leverage to force India to make concessions in sensitive sectors like agriculture, like MSME industries, in dairy and animal husbandry. And if these concessions are not given, US could possibly retaliate with even more higher tariffs to cripple Indian exports to the US market. US could stop some critical weapon supplies to India, or it might essentially side with Pakistan more closely, or give China a free hand. And that creates real challenges for India, security and geopolitical challenges. And that is where the new national security strategy is highly problematic for most countries, for most of America's friends. That's why there is a popular statement by Henry Kissinger, the then former national security advisor and later foreign secretary of the US. He was a secretary of state, right? So he said that it's more dangerous to be America's friends than to be America's enemy. It's much more dangerous to be a friend of the US than to be an enemy of the US, because when you're an enemy, you know that you have to be on guard. But when you're a friend, you're assuming that you have a friendship with the US, and the US ends up backstabbing you. The pain, that hurt would be much more. Right? And that is what US partners have experienced in the past. Be it European partners, be it India, many friends of the US have often been abandoned midway. So this will further such policies of the US. That is where the risk lies. It could shape a new global world order altogether. Coming to the next topic on page 10, there's a very interesting article on a big shift which is happening in Indian markets. In India's equity markets, a major shift is taking place. I want to explain this in as simple words as possible without making it too technical. See, when you look at equities, the stock market, when you look at uh, key indices like the Nifty 50, for example, generally the trend was that most of the capital invested in the Indian markets would come from foreign portfolio investors, foreign institutional investors. The foreign capital was always playing a big role in Indian markets, right from late 90s, early 2000s, till date for the last 2.5 decades. Foreign capital has been integral to Indian markets. But all of you know foreign capital is hot money. It's not FDI, if it is portfolio institutional investment. It is hot money because it's very volatile. It will flow into the country when there is a lucrative opportunity in India to earn good rates. But if there is a global crisis, or depending on policy changes of the US Federal Reserve and the US government, there would be a sudden, unexpected flight of capital from India, which would adversely affect the Indian markets. So we were always subjected to that vulnerability. Since our markets, our equities were largely dependent on foreign investments, and foreign capital being very volatile, it would come in and They would reap some good profits, but it would take flight when there was a distress situation, leaving the markets in chaos. But now a big shift is taking place where foreign portfolio investments have started declining to record levels. The Nifty Pulse report shows that FPI investments are down by nearly 16%. In the Nifty 50, for example, FPI holding has gone down to just 24%. Now, this is a big reduction. It's a 15-month low in the Indian market. And this place has now been taken by retail investors in our country. The space created by the flight of foreign capital and the lesser foreign capital coming into India is now occupied by our domestic investors, the retail investors. There has been a huge surge of interest in the stock markets amongst investors post the pandemic. Post COVID, given the ease of investment in our markets, how easily you can open demat accounts online. You can use trading platforms and apps on your phone to make those quick investments, reap quick profits. It has created a generational interest amongst millions of investors. We have seen a huge surge in mutual fund investments, in SIP plans, systematic investment plans. And today, this accounts for 19% of the equity market in the country. So domestic investments are overtaking foreign portfolio investments. That is a big fundamental shift happening in the Indian market. Now you might say this is good because foreign capital was volatile, and whenever there was a flight of foreign capital, it was creating chaos in the markets. You might argue that retail investments increasing might be good news because it will bring that stability to the market. Correct. This is a right argument. More domestic investments from our retail investors will bring greater stability to the market as it is less dependent on foreign portfolio investments. But however, there is a downside risk. The downside risk is that most of the retail investors who are investing in equity, they have very limited knowledge and very limited experience of dealing with stocks. It's largely a FOMO effect, which has pushed a number of retail investors. They may not understand how a stock moves or how a company is performing, what are the fundamentals of the companies or the products in which they are investing. They will just look at the returns, the past returns, and they hope that future returns would be the same. But stock markets never function like that. Historical returns is never an indicator for future returns. Right? Anything might happen. Even seasoned professionals, right, who handle such investment portfolios, even they struggle to give a decent return of 10 to 12%. That is after years of expertise and awareness and knowledge. These professional advisors as well take months of effort and they lose capital sometimes as well. Very hard to generate that return in the markets. Now, what will retail investors do when there is a sudden loss of confidence in the Indian market? Right now, everybody is very optimistic about the Indian economy. Right? This is largely a perception which is there. Suddenly, if let's say fundamentals are hit, if there is a crisis, which will come, the markets will have its ups and downs. There will be months of downfall and again weeks of recovery. But will retail investors have the patience? Will they have the knowledge, the expertise to hold on to their investments, to remain invested in the markets for long term returns? That is where the risk lies. And also, if you look at the primary markets today, there's a lot of interest in primary market investment. Take IPOs, for example. There's so much buzz around every IPO by startups. Take, for example, Lenskart, Nykaa, Zomato, Mama Earth, and many others, which created a huge buzz in the Indian markets. Retail investors flock to subscribe to these IPOs. And without hesitation, without even understanding the fundamentals of the company, they put their hard earned money into it. The concerning trend in our primary market is that in most of the recent IPOs, The founders were looking to make a exit. They were looking to book their profits, meaning the risk has now passed to retail investors. The question is, are retail investors ready to bear the risk? Many companies had unjustified PE ratios. Most investors won't even understand what's the PE ratio. And yet they would have subscribed to the offering, thinking it will bring good returns. For one reason why many startups have attracted such buzz and interest is because they are more popular. People are aware of the brand name and they assume that the company is going to do well without looking into the fundamentals of the organization, without looking at the account statements of the company. And this is where the concern lies. Are retail investors aware enough? Are they really aware in what they're investing? Because even if you look at Nifty 50 today, which consists of the top 50 companies with the top capex, promoter holding has gone down to one of its lowest ever. Hardly 43% of the holding is with the promoters, meaning promoters are taking an exit, booking their profits, making their money. Retail investors are getting trapped. Another craze which has come up is options trading. Even semi professional investors will struggle with optional markets, right? And newbies are entering, jumping into option trading. Just they're lured by the quick profit which is being promised. But the concern here is, are they ready for the downside of the market? Yes, it'll bring stability. It's good news for SEBI, for RBI as well. Because see, inflation right now has reached below the target of 2%, hardly 0.3 to 0.7%, which is giving a lot of room for RBI to play with liquidity to push further growth. So when there is a pro-growth inclination, sufficient liquidity in the market, obviously the positive sentiments will prevail. But it may not last forever. It's a honeymoon period. It will end sometime. There will be a new crisis, a new geopolitical crisis, or a new economic situation which develops. In that case, will retail investors, will they still have the stomach to stay invested? What will happen if they suffer losses? And what about the larger chaos it can cause in the markets? It could bring about a greater destabilization of the markets. Also, within the retail investor category, there is a lot of asymmetry. There are a few who are extremely rich, ultra wealthy, the millionaires, the billionaires, and even the high net worth individuals. Then you have the salaried class, the lower end of this segment, right, who barely make ends meet, but still they're investing in equity, hoping for good returns. So even in the retail category, the elite, the rich will make their money, but it is actually the poor retail investors who will lose out if there is a wipeout of the markets. That is the concern that lies. So this article is giving a warning, a note of caution to the market regulator, to SEBI, to step in, to play a role, to educate the retail investors, to spread awareness, to maintain better checks and balances in the system, to prevent the misuse of this ecosystem, right? So that is the concern that you need to point out or you need to take away from this article. Coming to the next topic on page 14. See, the emergence of artificial intelligence and large language models and generative AI. It has raised a serious challenge for copyrights because these LLMs, any generative AI model, it is trained on large troves of data, right, which is already freely available on the internet. Could be news articles, it could be books, research papers, could be news articles, it could be research data and research papers, it could be artwork. So, using the existing material, these algorithms are being trained by AI companies like OpenAI and the others. But some of the material might be copyrighted. Now, don't you think a newspaper agency would have invested a lot of money, put in a lot of effort to generate an investigative piece of journalism? Take, for example, Indian Express, Hindu. Why are they running this large organization with a number of reporters and journalists? Because they want to collect ground reports, fact check the data and the information, publish the best articles so that the news is as authentic as possible. But using their articles, if AI tools are trained, and if this company profits from that when it commercializes the model, What is the benefit for the publisher? Don't you think the publisher is losing out? They are the ones who generated the news articles, but AI tools are learning from this. And when they commercialize the tool, the AI company makes profit, but publishers are left behind. Same goes for creators of artwork. Same goes for scholars and scientists. Their research, their artwork, their creativity is being used to train these large language models. But what will they get in return? Because in a world without AI, their rights were protected under copyright laws. In India, we have the Copyright Act of 1957. Under the Copyright Act, intellectual property is protected through copyrights. So publishers, creators, they earn royalties if someone has to use their work, right? They have to take their explicit permission, they have to pay royalties as well. But AI firms have bypassed this because on the internet, much of the data was freely available. They've used it to train the LLMs. So the Indian government is looking to solve this problem. The Department for Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade, the DPIIT, a critical department in the Ministry of Commerce, has come out with a proposal. The proposal is to amend the copyright law, to bring an amendment to the Copyright Act of 1957 and introduce the concept of blanket licensing. The department is proposing a new concept in the field of copyrights, introducing the concept of blanket licensing by amending the law. Now, what do you mean by blanket licensing? If this amendment is carried out, then AI companies can use the data available to train their LLMs without any cost, without taking permission, without paying royalties. They can train the LLMs. But when they commercialize the data, when they release their models for commercial purposes and they start making money out of it, they will have to pay the profits, some of it, to the publishers and the creators. Is that clear? That's the concept of blanket licensing, where a blanket license is given to train the model, only to train the model. So they don't need permissions each time. They don't have to pay any royalties because they're not making any money out of it. They're just training the algorithm, building the algorithm. Once they roll it out commercially and they start making money from it, they have to share their profits with publishers and creators. So this is seen as a fair model because across the world, there are many litigations going on today. News agencies, then organizations have filed suits and cases against these AI companies, dragging them to courts. So India wants to ensure that the copyright issue is handled and publishers are protected, creators are protected, while making it easy for AI companies to train their LLM models. So India believes this concept could work, the concept of blanket licensing. There would be a trust where the funds would accrue, a society which is set up where the money from the commercialization of LLM models will flow. And this money will be used to compensate the publishers and the creators whose work and data would have been used to train these algorithms. So that is the mechanism being proposed by the government. Next, Mexico has ratified up to 50% tariffs, some of which could hit India. The Senate in the Mexico Assembly, right? They have the Mexican Parliament. The Senate has approved these tariffs, which are going to take effect from 1st Jan 2026. Up to 50% tariffs on non FTA partners. See, Mexico has a free trade agreement with many partner countries. But those who do not have a FTA with Mexico, which mainly includes Asian countries, including India. So the exports of these countries, which do not have a FTA with Mexico, would be subjected to 5 to 550% tariffs. But however, there's no cause for alarm from this because it's not entirely a new tariff. It has just been approved by the Senate and it is formally taking effect from next year. But it has already been in place since 2024 at least. It was brought out in April 2024 by Mexico. And This could specifically hurt few sectors in India. If not India's entire exports to Mexico, maybe some sectors will bear the brunt. And that is what you should be aware of. See, India's trade with Mexico is very minimal. It's around $5 billion. I mean, compared to other large trade relationships of India, India Mexico trade is still a minor part. But still, 5 billion is a big number on its own. And out of this, the auto industry, the motor car and the motorbike industry, the auto component industry, they have a lot of dependency on Mexico. Mexico is one of the biggest auto markets. Out of India's total exports to Mexico, 25% of our total exports is coming from motor car sector, including spare parts, components, and auto parts. 7% of this is coming from motorbike exports from India to Mexico. Nearly 32% of the total trade that we have with Mexico is coming from automobile industry. So you take the $5 to $6 billion number. Okay, let's say our total trade is $5 to $6 billion. 32% of it is from automobile industry. That's almost 1.5 to $2 billion, which is significant. With 50% tariffs, this will completely stop. Nobody will procure Indian auto parts if 50% tariffs are levied on India. So there will be a big hit on the auto industry in India. Is that clear? Mexico is a key market for auto exports, accounting for 10% of the total auto exports from our country. India is a leading exporter of auto components, and 10% of our total auto exports is going to Mexico. So this could completely stop if the tariffs take effect. That's why the industry is pressurizing the government of India to quickly talk to Mexico about a FTA or get an exemption for now and sign a free trade agreement so that India would be exempt from these tariffs. So that is what we take away from this topic. Coming to the prelim section, just two topics. The Tiwa society or the Tiwa community, Tiwa group of people are in the news. The topic under society, Tiwa community is in the news. The Hindu carries this image of the hill Tiwas marking the harvest festival during the paddy harvest season in Karbi Anglong region of Assam. So the Tiwa community is a very distinct ethnic group found in northeast of India. They their ancestry is of Tibeto-Burmese descent, Tibeto-Burmese ethnic group, and it is widely spread out across the northeastern parts of India. You find the Tiwa community in Assam, particularly in Karbi Anglong region, which is a hilly area. You also find them in the plains, in the Brahmaputra plains as well. You find them in Meghalaya, Manipur, Mizoram, and Arunachal Pradesh. This is where the Tiwa community can be found. They speak a unique language, the Tiwa language. They are believed to be related to the Chutia tribe, and they are believed to be of Tibeto-Burmese ancestry, with some members of the community found in neighboring Bangladesh and Myanmar as well. So within the Tiwa community, there are two types, two distinct clans exist: the hill Tiwa and the plain Tiwa. Those found in the hill areas, those found in the plain areas. The hills Tiwa are the ones who are found in the hillier areas of Assam, particularly in the Karbi Anglong region, right? And the plains Tiwa are found in the plains of the Brahmaputra. So majority of the hill Tiwa are Hindus. They follow Hinduism, cultural religious practices. Some of them are Christians, a very small minority are Christians, and they speak the distinct language, the Tiwa language. So this is one of the distinct ethnic groups of Northeast India, which is quite frequently in the news. Coming to the last topic, the United States has cleared a mega defense deal which could benefit Pakistan. The deal is in the range of $686 million, and United States would be supplying spare parts and components to help Pakistan maintain the F-16 fighter jets, which are the mainstay of the Pakistani Air Force. This again shows the US Pakistan relations and how it contradicts American commitments to India. The US, by supplying the F-16 many years ago, tilted the balance and gave Pakistan a slight edge. with regard to the Indian Air Force. Of course, Indian Air Force has outmaneuvered Pakistani Air Force with its new procurements, but it did add much more muscle to the Pakistani air capabilities. Now, though India is a major defense partner of the US, though we have a global strategic partnership and US is supposed to work with India to stabilize the Indo-Pacific, it is colluding and siding with Pakistan, and we have seen this right from the start of this year. Even after the Pahalgam attack and Operation Sindoor, Donald Trump has been warming up to the Pakistani leadership, be it Shahbaz Sharif or Asim Munir. Trump has been getting very closer to the Pakistani leadership, and US is willing to do more business with Pakistan. Pakistan is willing to give up its minerals and resources in return for global diplomatic support. And basically, this could give a free pass for Pakistan's sponsorship of terrorism. With no American pressure, Pakistan could scale up its covert war against India. While India already had these concerns, along with that, now US is rubbing more salt into the wound by almost approving a $686 million deal to provide for the upgradation of the F-16 fighter jet fleet. US is saying this will not tilt the balance of military power because it's not any big upgrade. They're not adding some new capabilities. They're just servicing and maintaining them, supplying basic logistics and components and spare parts, which will allow Pakistan to run the existing jets under safe operational conditions. But from India's perspective, it looks different. It will be a strengthening of Pakistani capabilities. It will help Pakistan sustain its uh, air capabilities, which could be misused against India. So this opens up a very difficult chapter in India-US relations, the supply of American weapons, advanced weapons to Pakistan, how it has been propping up Pakistan, which could be a threat to India. As of now, the deal is still not final. It requires congressional approval. US Congress has to approve it. But once it is done, US would be supplying the components to upgrade the F-16s. On this note, we bring the discussion to an end. I hope you guys have understood all the topics that we have discussed. If you like the session, please press the like button and do support us with your comments. That's it. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.